Hello, tonight we are going to continue our work in Chapter 6, and I'm going to get us down to the section I'd like to talk about, and that's the section on a technology called jQuery. We have been learning in the earlier part of this chapter and earlier in the book, and I'm hoping in a couple of your other classes, about JavaScript, and JavaScript being the coding language that sits inside of a browser. And you guys are familiar with it at this point. You guys know it's not a compiled language, it's an interpreted language that operates directly in the client. There is this very important JavaScript library called jQuery. And jQuery actually, if you're curious, it has its own website. So if you go out and you look at just a quick jQuery search, you'll end up on jQuery.com, which takes you to the website. And the thing that is really cool about jQuery is the fact that it works so well and so easily and so easy to learn that it has become by far the most prevalent JavaScript library out there in terms of functionality and usage. In fact, to the point where it almost is kind of considered part of JavaScript now. Like people just kind of use it and don't really think about it. The catch, of course, to using it is the fact that it is a library, so you have to pull in some files to your project and call those files onto your page in order for it to operate. It is open source. It's free. It works on every platform. You can come directly to this site and actually download jQuery. In fact, there was a button right on the main page here, right? So if you just want to download the files, and one way you can include them in your project, frankly, is you just download it, unzip whatever's there, and then add the files to your folder, link it up, you're all good to go. Of course, we're using Visual Studio, and Visual Studio's got its own package manager, which allows you to do exactly that without doing it manually. And for my money, frankly, it's easier to use that. But if you are coding manually, just always keep in mind, if you're working with HTML, if you want to use any jQuery stuff, just come here, grab the files, and go. Now, I do want to start, before I use all the stuff in the book, which is a little bit, kind of specific in a sense, I do want to take us over to W3 Schools, and I want to show you how important jQuery is, because you see how they have their site broken down into certain technologies. And one thing that you guys can know as web developers, if you come to this site, and this is their main site, right? This is their main page, and you learn or look at all the links that are in the sidebar here about the technologies that they're showing on this website. Clearly, HTML and CSS are important, right? But if you're looking at any of the stuff that's here, and you go, oh my God, what is Bootstrap? What is AngularJS or JSON or AJAX or SQL or PHP? And really what I'm hoping is that you guys are starting to get to the point now where it's like, well, I know what that is. I know what that is. I've tried that. At least that you're getting to that point. And ideally, when you become like pretty well versed in this stuff, that you'll know what almost all this stuff is and have used it at some point in time. I'm not saying that you're an expert, because the truth is nobody's really an expert at anything unless you're doing it all the time, usually in their day-to-day work. And then you really do become an expert, because, that's what you do. It's your bread and butter. But you can see that jQuery, right after they show JavaScript, jQuery is the next one, right? So that's a pretty good clue that that's an important technology. Notice also that JSON, that other technology that we were talking about, that's on this list. Very important. AJAX, very important. We do that stuff in this class too. One that we don't really do in earnest in this class is AngularJS. And I am seeing, in the marketplace, like if you guys are shopping for jobs, and you should always be looking at the want ads just to see what's out there. That's a technology that you might want to investigate on your own and explore. Where? Right here. At least read up on it, and then go ahead and start trying some examples. But since our topic is actually jQuery and not Angular, let's take a look at the jQuery site here. For me, the crux of jQuery is a combination of its elegant selector system in combination with a beautiful set of pre-built libraries that are very intuitive to use without a lot of effort. Okay, it's that combination that's really made it popular. In fact, one of the things that really kind of drove it to success is when Gateway came out with their Gmail program. It was a while ago, but please don't read any of the messages. Okay. um, the way that they really got a lot of this stuff to work, and I'm going to look at something that's kind of inane here, like this. Okay. Do you guys notice that when I click this, what happened on the screen? And I know you probably have heard this spiel in my other classes, right? Did the whole screen change? Are you sure? What changed? Yeah, I mean, really, this area here stayed the same, and I clicked inbox or I clicked the message. It didn't redraw the screen. It grabbed information from the server, pulled it up into the application in the browser that's already running. It's not refreshing the page. And actually, that technology, which we're going to learn in the near future, is called Ajax, right? That actually does that transaction. But a lot of the other stuff that happens, so for example, if I was in here and I wanted to like drag and drop this message, and you notice how there's a little box that follows and it changes to a hand, all these like weird little interactive, cool little animations and stuff. The interactivity, really, a lot of that comes from jQuery. And Google was a huge proponent of this technology before it really caught on. And it was their being into it that really kind of drove it into the mainstream, because people would look at what they're doing and it's like, how'd you guys do that? And of course, you guys know you can't hide JavaScript from people. If you have a library that's sitting there and you have functions that are, or methods that you've developed, it's all there for public view if somebody knows how to look, and developers know how to look. So people would say, oh, what's Google doing? Well, maybe we should do it too. And then it kind of caught on and took off. Well, let's actually go back here to the W3 school site and just kind of explore a little bit. And I'm just going to, go with this little try it yourself tool that they have here. And I don't know if you guys have ever played with these. I hope you have, right? But this is a fun little way to learn new things. But the heart of this, of course, is the library itself. And you guys notice here that what do they use as a source? And I want you to look right where my I-beam cursor is. Yeah. They're not even like loading the files locally, right? In our book, and a lot of tutorials, even in our jQuery class, normally what we do is we'll pull the files down and include them in the project, and the libraries in the folders, like your CSS or your other JavaScript. But just like the web fonts that we were talking about a week or so ago, one of the better ways to really do jQuery is to just use the online repositories that are basically the same ones that you would download and include in your project. So right here, you're going to see that this points clearly to Google's servers, right? So instead of using your own servers, you're using Google's. And one of the reasons why that is a really smart move, because chances are you've probably been using your Gmail account today, or you were probably on some website that was using that same exact library, and guess where that file already sits? On your hard drive, on your cache inside your browser. Okay, so one strategy that a lot of developers use is they don't even bother including these files in their hosting site or in their folder structure. You can just point to the online repositories, and that's absolutely fine, but it is version dependent. And notice that the current working version is like 3 point something. Our book has what, like 1.8 or something like that, right? Shows how dated it is because it's really advanced that far. I did have this question the other day. Are the commands in our book deprecated? I don't believe any of the ones in our book are deprecated. If you do run into one, let me know so I can share it with people. But that does occasionally happen. Hopefully that's not the case here. Okay, so somehow you're including those source files. And you know what, folks? You want to see what that is? Well, you can actually take that URL, copy it, paste it into your browser, and it will pull up the file. There it is. Got that? Now, what's kind of interesting about this as a file, right? Because really what this is, it's a collection of functions written in JavaScript. That's all it is. But whenever you see this little bit right here, min, What does that mean? It means minified. Minified code is when I write my code as a human being, I name the functions as to what they do. So like function, game over, and then all these lines of code, one statement per line, everything's easy for me to read, all the names make sense to me. If you look at this code, and I'm going to zoom in, right? You're going to see that there's a whole lot of stuff going on where even if you find a function call, holy cow, can you guys read this? No, what they do, a minified code is when you take code that humans can read and you squeeze it down, you take out all the spaces, all the extra stuff that's on the page that makes it easier to read, mostly spacing and indents, and long names. And they'll take like a long name where it's like game over, display score to user. That might be a function you might create. And they'll change it to like A. I'm not kidding. They'll change it to something that's really short so the computer can run it faster. So whenever you see jQuery libraries or any libraries and there's a min in it, it means minified, and it means the code is condensed. And in fact, if you like zoom way out here, not that far. That's a little overkill. And what I'm trying to do, let's get it back to a zero zoom here, is I'm trying to, like, how many lines of code are here? Well, it looks like 1,000, but it's one line of code. It's all, they put it all in one line. So if you like put it into your editor and you like scroll down to line 2, well, there is no line 2. Why? Because that makes it run faster too. So it's all about speed. Because this is a lot of code it has to parse through. So every time I load up that page, it pulls in that whole library into memory. So that's why when you go to some websites and you look at their source code and you see how many libraries they're linking up, they'll be linking up like their custom CSS, jQuery, Angular, Bootstrap, yada, yada, yada. And all of a sudden you got like 20, 30, 40,000 lines of code coming into your browser. No wonder it takes half a second to load Facebook. And you get frustrated on top of it all, right? There's no shortcut for efficiency, folks. So whenever you can use a minified library, you do. So one thing that you'll learn in the book is that when you do pull down the jQuery repositories, that there'll be a collection of files that go with it. When you do it inside of Visual Studio, you guys are going to notice that one thing that's included is both the full version, where you can read the code like normal, the minified version, which is best for deployment, and then you'll usually have things like IntelliSense or things that are very specific to certain functions. So for example, one thing that was really popular with jQuery early on was its mobile libraries, right? And they're still very popular. So there's jQuery mobile UI libraries. And what those libraries do is create screens for apps that look like all the apps that you have on your phone. It's like some developer isn't sitting there writing that button or that drop down or that expander or that slider. They're just pulling it in from the jQuery mobile libraries and they're using it. And what you guys are going to see if you start to explore those, and I encourage you because we can't teach you all this stuff in this program, right? It really takes some self-exploration. When you start playing with those tools, you're like, oh, that's how they do that. And it's all out there for the taking, folks. All you have to do is hunt it down and try it. And it's pretty easy to employ. All right, so knowing some of that, let's now go back to this little example. And we know that we're linked up, and then we have a script section in our document. Now, like regular JavaScript, it is better to put this stuff in an external file. But for sake of demonstration, they have it in line. And just like regular JavaScript, you can run it in all the same kind of ways. So you can run it in the head of the document. You can run it in line with the HTML, or like some people like to do is put it at the bottom. It's all situationally dependent, okay, like what it is you're trying to do. One thing that you will notice, though, about jQuery that's really important is all jQuery statements are prefaced with a $sign. So you can see that there's the $sign, and that's the first clue right there. This is jQuery. We're between script tags, and there's a $sign. What immediately follows that $sign in parentheses is your selector. This is why it's cool. that selector is the same exact selector you would use for CSS. No wonder this became popular, right? You're learning your CSS selectors. You understand what a class is. You understand what a paragraph is. You understand what an ID is. You've even learned all those little weird new ones where you can select attributes or nth child or whatever, right? So whatever selector you would normally use goes in between those parentheses. Now the one that's used on every single jQuery page in order to trigger jQuery is this very first one that you see there, which is what we call the document ready function. And all that does is it waits to see, is the document loaded? Is it ready? All right, let's go. That's basically what that does. Because otherwise the code won't trigger. So it needs the page to load before it can actually trigger the code. Once you're inside there, and I want you to notice here the syntax, right? So once the document is loaded and ready, and it recognizes it, so this returns a true, then it triggers an anonymous function, which is whatever the rest of your jQuery is. It's kind of a little bit of a weird approach, but that's how it's done. All right, document ready function is always there. Triggers an anonymous function, which runs the rest of your jQuery. All right, so then once you actually get to the nitty-gritty of it, notice that we have a selector. And what is the selector? Paragraph, right? Notice that that's inside quotes, because that's considered text, right? But that's the selector, paragraph. And then what's that going to do? Well, let's see, it's something like click. Well, I guess if there's a click, then we trigger an anonymous function that does what? Hides it. Oh my God, is that easy, right? So, so down here we see we have 3 paragraphs that are rendered. So any one of them that I click on, doesn't matter what order, they just go away. Do you know how much more code it would take in JavaScript to accomplish the same effect? Not the least of which is this $ and selector would be replaced by document, get element by tag name, the tag name, and then hopefully you got a method that actually does all the hiding or whatever. All this stuff is really quick to select, really easy to employ. And in fact, what I would encourage you real strongly to do if you really are curious about this technology is really come here and go through these here, let's do something that's kind of fun. Let's go to one where there's some animation, right? So go to try it yourself. Now you can see that in this example, as we watch an animation up top here, right? We have a selector for a button. Do we have a button on the page? We sure do. When we click that button, it's going to look for the selector of a div. Where's our div? Well, apparently the div is just this box, right? And when I click it, it animates left 250 pixels. Let's see. Pretty slick.
Can you, instead of just div people, like an ID in there or a class?
Absolutely. So the question was, if you guys can't hear in the recording, instead of div, could I put like an ID or a selector? Anything that you would use to select an object with CSS can be placed between those parentheses. Nope. Yeah, well, if it's a class, you put dot, the selector, yeah, inside there. So it's absolutely possible to use all those same selectors. That's the beauty of this. It was initially used to just do simple animations and fades and hiding things and showing things. And then it kind of developed from there into much more sophisticated tools. If you guys want a good elective to take, you can take the graphics programming class. It's not going to be offered much more because that degree is being retired, but it is a fun class, right, Susie? There's a lot to learn in it. And I think it's a pretty lighthearted class compared to a lot of the other classes that we have, just because it's more animated, I guess. All right, let's go back over to the book now and in earnest learn about what the book wants us to learn about. All right. Now, kind of a little bit of a background, but some of the things that jQuery allows us to do are some of the things that you see listed here. It's not unusual for jQuery, like JavaScript, to not only control simple things like doing math, for example, or storing a variable, or grabbing information, analyzing it, and then doing something conditionally. But we can also use that information to do some other more sophisticated things. One of the more sophisticated things that we can do are things like Ajax. And Ajax is where we can actually change the contents of a page with server-side interaction without necessarily having to have a database. But it might be a database, so it gets kind of into these weird gray areas. But what it allows us to do is dynamically change a part of a page without reloading the page. That's huge. In fact, it's extremely important technology. That is exactly what makes Gmail work, like what I was showing you. I click on a message header, it goes to the server, it finds the message, it pulls it back onto the screen. I didn't even leave the page. It's kind of cool, right? It also helps our applications to really behave in a way that's much more like a desktop application, because a desktop application can do those kind of things. Another thing that I think is pretty important, aside from all like the graphical things that we can do, we can apply CSS, we can animate things, we can make things appear and disappear like we were talking about, but we can also do things like this, where we can actually defer objects. And this is actually kind of a sophisticated thing, where we can actually make things wait for other things to happen before something happens. That's pretty important too, right? Sometimes, you don't want that ball to bounce across the screen until, the animated character kicks it. You don't just want it to go bouncing, right? Or you want to trigger it somehow. Or you need it to wait, for the, the bomb to drop and then the ball to bounce. That kind of thing. So that helps quite a bit. There's also a really powerful set of tools that are built in, not only for the selectors, but how you can actually kind of tunnel into all the DOM objects that are available through the JavaScript API. So JavaScript and the DOM are really kind of at the core of this still. jQuery is just a simplified way to do the work. What is the DOM? Yes, correct. I was willing that thought into your brain. Yes, it's a document object model that takes all the components of your browser and breaks it down into components that are selectively addressable in a tree structure. So the browser itself is part of the DOM. The document that you load into the browser window is part of the DOM. That's why we have the document ready function. And because of that, that means we can code for it, right? So we can code for the browser window. We can probe the browser window and find out, is this Mozilla? Is it Internet Explorer? Is it Opera? What is this, right? I can write separate code based on that. Or I can take any part of that document, from the document itself to any part of the code, any part of the HTML structure. So here's where we go back to that content and structure thing that I'm talking about constantly. That if you think of your document as content and structure, anything that has a tag or anything that's inside those tags, we can manipulate through the DOM and through jQuery. Very, very important conceptually. Very important. All right. So the book walks you through how we're going to go installing jQuery into the project. We are going to do that, so I'm not going to talk about it too much here. But when you are done installing it, you're going to see there's a complete set of jQuery tools there. Notice the full jQuery library, the minified version of that library, and then the IntelliSense for Visual Studio. That's so like when you're typing stuff, it helps you fill in the blanks and also helps to underline code errors. That's why that's there. If you were downloading jQuery into a project where you're not using Visual Studio, that's obviously not necessary, right? But those tools are out there because it's that popular. All right. As we saw, wherever your library happens to be, you got a link to it in the head of your document. And then when you get to the point where you are going to utilize the code, that's where your selectors come into play. Look at these older versions of JavaScript and the whole document get element by ID and then the whole thing. in essence, that dollar sign, what that's doing is it's replacing that whole string. I want to walk, but my headphone cable is not that long. So in jQuery, and they show all the testing stuff, that is all reduced to this. Can you see the advantage right there? All right. They show you how the IntelliSense works here, and I'm not too worried about that. They talk about the unit testing stuff, and I'm not too worried about that. What I am really more concerned with is just the syntax of it all and how it's applied. I know that some of you have been working on this chapter. Have you guys found typos and errors and some things not working? Okay, great. I said sarcastically. We will solve those issues. All right, but let's take a look here at like jQuery used in some other capacities. And what I want you to notice, most importantly, is how seamlessly it can kind of be dropped into regular JavaScript. So, and this is important, I can intermingle my regular JavaScript in jQuery on the fly, even in the middle of a statement. That might not be something you would intuitively guess, but very important. Right? So in this case here, we see a variable declared, we see an if statement, all the rest of it is regular JavaScript except for right where I have highlighted in the next line below. But that's jQuery, so I can just drop in jQuery and it just works? Yes, right in the middle of your JavaScript. It works just like that. Because really, folks, it's a library of JavaScript, so it's the same language. So that's the beauty of it. Another thing that is really cool, and I don't know if that's one of their next examples here, I'm thinking probably not, and I'm going to go back to W3 Schools for this, is, and they don't have an example that I can pull up really quickly, but whenever you see the selector, it's typically followed by some sort of a function or a method that you're calling by name, maybe passing a parameter to it, maybe not. But one capability that jQuery has is this capability of what we call chaining methods. So I can say, let's see, if my div was called, bouncing ball, I could say $bouncing ball dot animate left dot fade slow dot hide dot show dot toggle dot. I can keep going like that, and it'll just do it. That's pretty cool too. So, wow. All of a sudden, if you start knowing what all these like shortcut commands are, you can start doing some pretty sophisticated things with a very minimal amount of code. At the very least, have you guys gone to pages and you land on the page and it just kind of fades in the view? Have you seen that effect? Really easy with jQuery. You can apply it to an entire website. Why do people do that? Looks better. What's the advantage of something looking better? It keeps people on your site. What's the advantage of that? They give you more money, right? Then you get paid more. And everything is perfect after that, right?
But with all that flexibility, test also, I come on 6 months after. How does one support something that is so flexible and could extend without?
That's a great question. The question is, how do you support something that's so flexible in essence, right? I wouldn't worry about it, basically. At that point, if you've created something so cool and you didn't document it somehow, and you're retired, or, do you really care? That's really good. But you do. Yeah, but if you're hired to fix that code, right? Welcome to intro-level programming, Richard. That's exactly what they do to you, is they put you in these situations where they try to get you to fix those things. But I'll tell you what, there's always a lot to learn. And sometimes you learn that sometimes it's better to start over than it is to try to recreate. But this is a really easy language to figure out, where if you were in JavaScript and you were custom coding some of these effects from scratch, Because that's basically what they did, right? You know, if you look at like this example where they're animating on the website, right? I mean, there's obviously a whole lot more to animate than just telling it the thing to move. So somewhere there's code that goes in there and granularly tells it to move a certain amount and how to do it. You just don't have to recreate that anymore. And if the keyword command is so simple as to animate left 250 pixels, and really what that's telling you is like, this is the 0 point, we're moving it over 250 pixels, right? How much more do you really need to know?
I wasn't concerned about that.
You're thinking about something more complicated than that?
Why could lead to something that takes 2 weeks?
That sounds more like a philosophical question when it comes down to it. All right. One thing I do want to point out, and I have a little highlight here, is you are going to see that we are going to have a file within our project that's going to be created that's going to have some references. And you guys should notice from the beginning of the line, there's all those slashes, right? So we know right away that these are comments technically in the code. But to the development environment that we're working, there's special directives. So to Visual Studio, these have special meaning. Other applications, maybe not so much. Okay, but given the fact that we're using that tool, it's going to be important. All right.
So those 3 slashes aren't universal.
They're not universal. Well, they're universal in the fact that the first 2 create a comment.
But the 3 doesn't mean like that you can make for reference or whatever, like
No, it does not mean that. No, it doesn't. That's a good question. All right. Let's keep moving on here. And one thing that you're going to see with the jQuery is they do a lot of the same thing they do with JavaScript in this book, and that is often to truncate things, you can do things like that first line where it says var doc equals $document, so that I don't even have to type that much. Oh my God, JavaScript can really kind of take you down this rabbit hole where you can kind of really obscure the fact of what you're working with. Susie was working with creating a game using some Canvas tools. And you do that a lot in Canvas, where you create the canvas and usually you give it some sort of a little, like 2, 3, 4-letter prefix, and then that just refers to the whole environment rather than including entire strings. That happens here as well. One thing that's really, really slick inside of jQuery are all the event handlers that are built in. I think it's pretty intuitive. You guys should know about event handlers at this point and how they basically operate. So it really shouldn't take too much for you guys to figure out that that first statement here where it says, well, I got something that's called button submit. I could probably guess that it's a button with an ID of button submit. I mean, that's a pretty good guess. On what? On click, the event handler, it triggers a function. What's my function? Well, it's defined somewhere else. So easy. So easy to apply it in event handler. Triggering event handlers can actually happen through code. So you can actually make an event trigger without actually clicking on something via the code automatically. Did you ever have that happen to you on a website? Download now, but I swear I didn't click, and this happened to me, believe it or not, last night I was downloading a piece of software I used many years. I won't badmouth it because I still think it's good software. But after I installed it, all of a sudden I had Avast antivirus installed on my computer. And I was like, what the? I was like, no! And of course, it took a long time to uninstall it. What was really amusing about it is they had a survey at the end, why did you uninstall? And I wasn't quite so polite in my comments. I actually said I thought it was really intrusive that it automatically installed itself without my permission. So I just wanted to let them know that. I'm not like knocking their product, but all right. That's really kind of the lesson in a nutshell, and the rest we're going to pick up in the exercise as we get working. So I'm actually going to end this video here. We're going to start the exercise, but we're going to take a 5-minute break first here in class because I think it's probably a good time for it, and then we'll come back and code.